When I, started work here, and I'm sorry, I should introduce myself. I'm just so excited to talk about this. My name's Catherine Larson, and I'm the curator of ancient glass here at the Corning Museum of Glass. So when I started work here in Corning several years ago, and I was poking around in storage like you do when you're a curator, and I came across this set of kind of fragmentary metal pieces, didn't really look like much. Here you see them in the top upper right of the slide, and some of these ceramic jars. And I thought, that's an odd thing for a glass museum to have. Why do we have these things? And so I went into our database and looked and found out that it turns out we acquired these as a group with 5 glass jars, which had been on view in our galleries, that were all found together in a funerary assemblage. And you see on the right here, sort of the documentation from the 1960s that describes where these things came from and how they ended up coming to Corning. So this single page of information was really all we had about them. And so I'd had really a dream for the last several years to think about a way to reunite this assemblage of artifacts that were all found together. We acquired them, we intended to display them together in the 60s, and really put glass in the context with other ceramic and metal finds with which it came from. But I didn't have a lot to go on. So when we started working on Past Present about a little over a year ago, I reached out to my networks for some help to try to understand what was happening with this group of material. So I was able to connect with Patrick Jung, a colleague in Germany, who really helped with some of this research. If I could get to the next slide, please. So here's the group of material that we found, that as we have it displayed together in the museum in Past Present, and really reuniting these objects. So as I said, so Patrick really helped me understand and did really amazing research to help us understand the history of these pieces better. And then that's really the genesis of this panel today. So we have, as I mentioned, we're going to start with Patrick. Patrick's going to talk about the work he did on this, on understanding the history of these objects and how they came to Corning and what their history was before they came to Corning. And then we'll hear a little bit, and I'll introduce each of the speakers as we go. So we're going to start with Patrick, and I'll read Patrick's bio here. So Patrick Jung, PhD, is curator of the archaeological collection of the Ruhr Museum in Germany. With a background in pre- and proto-history, ancient history, and classical archaeology, he has been and is responsible for several exhibitions in different museums in Western Germany. Moreover, he is author and editor of various publications. Additionally, he conducts lectures on archaeology, history, and museology at the universities of Duisburg, Essen, and Bochum. So with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick. Thanks.
So, hello to you all from my side. As Kate just mentioned, my name is Patrick Jung, and I'm curator of the archaeological collection of the Ruhr Museum in the city of Essen in Germany. And at first, I want to thank Kate Larson for the opportunity to be part of this seminar. It is really my pleasure to present you the results of some research I have recently done about the special convolute of Roman finds Kate just introduced to you. May I have the first slide, please? On the first slide, you will see a picture of the object. Okay, yeah, there we are. So in November 2021, so almost 1 year ago, Kate reached out to me with some questions about those Roman artifacts that belong to the Corning Museum of Glass's collection and were meant to be part of an upcoming exhibition. In fact, presenting you the results, my results, I won't tell you much about glass right now. I, on my side, will focus on the background story of the objects, which extends from the Roman period, as they are Roman objects, over the 19th century and World War II to the present day. So can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. And now let's dig in. First, I want to show you another image of the objects in question. They are more or less typical Roman finds from the 1st to the 4th century AD, as they are found, I would say, quite often in the northwestern provinces of the Roman Empire. You can see glass vessels that were used as cinerary urns, a stone container for one of those urns, some pottery jugs, and the remnants of some bronze vessels. I think you can identify the objects. I think I cannot show them to you. I cannot mark them, but I think it's quite obvious. Those objects are grave finds, once used to perform funerary rites, to contain the remnants of the burned bodies of the deceased, and as grave goods for use in the next world. But it's important to mention that they are obviously not from one single grave. That's very important. In fact, we don't know much about the circumstances of their excavation. Unfortunately, we don't know much about it. The reason is quite simple. They were found already about 160 years ago, in the year 1863. So quite a long time ago already. Yeah, archaeology not only does consist of field work, as most people think, digging and excavating. Sometimes we work more like detectives, putting little pieces of a puzzle together to find the story behind it. And that's what we are doing right now. Next slide, please. We will begin with my chapter 1, the Roman Empire. Next slide, please. To reveal the story, let's start with a map of the Roman Empire in the early 3rd century AD. We can see the Mediterranean, which is surrounded by the provinces of the empire. Our objects were found in the province of Germania Inferior, which means Lower Germany. Next one, please. There should be a red circle or an arrow, a red arrow. That's about the find spot of the objects near the River Rhine in what is today Germany. Next slide, please. The province was established around 85 AD, after the Romans had pushed their boundaries eastwards to the shore of the River Rhine in the decades around the birth of Christ. You can see it on the map, a map of Germania Inferior. And I think you can see it. It's a province northern of Germania Superior, and you can see the eastern part of Britannia, which is modern England. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, the people living in the province had a mixed culture based on Germanic and Celtic roots, combined with elements of the traditional Roman culture. We can see this in many archaeological finds that are related to topics like everyday living, agriculture, warfare, religion, or burial customs, like in the case of the Flamersheim objects you have seen on the pictures before. Next one, please. Here you can see the modern village of Flamersheim, as it is situated in a rural area, obviously, surrounded mostly by farmland. The River Rhine to the east is about 15 miles away. so not very far. And the city of Bonn, the modern city of Bonn, is around 13 miles to the northeast. Maybe you have heard about it. It was the former German capital before Berlin became Germany's capital. In Roman times, the city, Bonn, was the site of a Roman legionary fortress, which was accompanied by relatively large civilian settlements. So a big central Roman place. The area of modern Flamersheim can be described as the hinterland of this Roman central place, the backyard, so to say. Next one, please. Yeah, there are quite some Roman find spots known around Flamersheim, mostly single finds with no documented contexts. But in the center of the village, the remains of a Roman villa have become known. In 2010, the remnants of a Roman floor mosaic were excavated, as you can see it on the picture on the slide. These remnants belonged to a rich Roman villa or a rural estate, a typical Roman mosaic. Usually such areas were densely populated with farms and estates, so-called villae rusticae. These farms produced the grain and other goods. The soldiers and civilians in the military camps, villages, and cities needed to feed themselves. So the Flamersheim area in Roman times was not so different from today. A rural area, dotted with so-called villae rusticae, so farms and estates. Next one, please. Next slide, please. And it is known, I can see some of the questions, and I just saw the outlines of modern Flamersheim, some kind of a rectangular shape. This has nothing to do with Roman times. We know there was a medieval villa, but I will tell you some things about it. Going back to medieval times, and there were surely buildings in Roman times, but unfortunately we don't know much about the shape of these buildings. We only have this mosaic. So now you can see Flamersheim Castle. Flamersheim Castle, a building in the center of the modern village of Flamersheim, as it was depicted around 1860. On its ground, on the ground of this castle, the Roman objects were found. Let me tell you some details about the castle's history, as they are important for the rest of our story. We know that already in the 9th century, there was a building at this place. This is what we know. There was a building at this place, but we have no archaeological remains of it. We only have a literary source that tells us that there was a king's villa at this place. And this place later became a medieval castle. And around 1860, the castle was bought and rebuilt in Baroque revival style by Caroline Bamberg, the widow of a rich industrial and businessman. And her son, Julius Bamberg, later became a noble among the Prussian nobility and called himself further on von Bamberg. So that's why the von is in the name. He was nobled by the Prussian king. Now you might ask, what has this to do with the Roman finds? And next slide, please. I can tell you. The answer to this question gives a famous German scholar at that time, Professor Otto Jahn. You can see him on the slide on the left side. Otto Jahn was a philologist and archaeologist, an early ecologist, based at the University of Bonn, again, Bonn. In 1863, he published an article in a scientific journal, the Bonner Jahrbücher. Jahrbuch meaning annual or yearbook. The text was titled Römische Altertümer in Flamersheim in German, meaning Roman antiquities in Flamersheim. Next slide, please. Right at the beginning of the text, he writes, you can see it in German, the original scan on the left side and the transcription on the translation on the right side. Mr. Julius Bemberg in Elberfeld had a tree garden planted in the fall of this year on his estate Flamersheim, right next to the castle. When the pits were dug into which the trees were to be planted, a Roman burial ground was found. That's what Otto Jahn writes in the year 1863. He then describes a great amount of Roman finds, including glass urns, stone containers, ceramic and metal vessels, precious jewelry, and even some coins. Unfortunately, there are no pictures of these objects in his article, but their amount clearly exceeds the Flamersheim finds that are known today. It was a much greater amount. So what happened to all those antiquities that are lost today? I visited the great-grandson of Julius von Bemberg, who's called Robert von Bemberg, at Flamersheim Castle in the spring of this year. He was born in 1944 and told me about his memories from when he was a kid. The objects you have seen on the picture were stored in a showcase in the living room of the castle, in the living room of the von Bembergs. His father, Jürgen von Bemberg, was very proud of them because he himself once had inherited them from his father. We don't know what had happened to the other objects Otto Jahn describes in his text. But it seems likely that the jewelry and other obviously more precious objects, maybe the coins, for example, were sold at an unknown time. Also, Robert von Bemberg told me that after World War II, the family had financial problems and the castle badly needed some renovation. So in 1966, his father finally sold the convolute that is known today, the convolute that was left from this treasure, to the Corning Museum of Glass. And he believes that his father needed money to renovate the roof of one of the castle's towers. It was in bad condition at that time and it needed some renovation and he needed money to do it. So the family treasure was sold. It is unknown how the contact between Jürgen von Bemberg and the Corning Museum was established, how they got to know each other, but both sides had excellent contacts to several museums in Cologne and other cities in the area, as he suspects, he suspects that the contact was put in place by some people working at one of those museums, which is very likely. Next slide, please. Now, chapter 3, World War II. However, talking about the whereabouts of those lost objects, I can present at least one option. Robert von Bemberg told me another story related with the family's collection of antiquities. Next slide, please. This might be a bit of surprise, maybe. In early 1945, just months before the end of World War II, units of the US Army were stationed at Castle Flamersheim and the surrounding village. In this phase of the war, a very late phase of the war, the US Army prepared the crossing of the River Rhine to march further into the territory of the Third Reich. For some time, General George S. Patton used the castle as his headquarters. From here, the conquering of the famous bridge of Remagen was prepared. You can see General George S. Patton, as I'm sure most of you know. And on the right side, a picture of the Remagen Bridge in March 1945, shortly after it was conquered by the US Army. Next slide, please. In fact, at our meeting, we sat at the very table on which the attack on the bridge was planned by Patton. Unfortunately, I cannot show you a picture of the table and the room because for Mr. von Bamberg, it's private, but I can assure you it's really a spectacular sight. I'm really sorry, I cannot show it to you. But more important for us, for our story, when the US Army left Flamersheim, the soldiers took away most of the family's treasures. However, Robert von Bamberg told me that his mother was able to make a deal with General Patton. He allowed her to name several artifacts that were especially valuable for the family, the real family treasures. Those were spared, but most other objects were taken away. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but one of the things the soldiers took away was his grandfather's large coin collection. He told me a lot about the obviously really great collection of coins, ancient coins, medieval coins, other coins, and maybe the coins mentioned by Otto Jahn that were found 1863 in the Roman graves were part of this collection that was taken away by the soldiers. But we don't know it. The von Bamberg family tried to get information about it, but yeah, they are lost. Nothing left anymore from those objects. And next one, please. Today, chapter 4. Lastly, we can reconstruct where the Roman objects were found. Do we know where they were found? I have told you at the ground of Castle Flamersheim, but maybe we don't. We know a little bit more. And yes, indeed, we do know more. And next slide, please. Again, here you see an aerial picture of Flamersheim and Flamersheim Castle. Flamersheim Castle in the center of it, right east to the castle's main building. There's a pond or a small lake, and east of that, there's a small park. Robert von Bamberg knows that this park was created by his great-grandfather, Julius von Bamberg, and the terrain has not been redesigned since then. It's the same area, the same tree garden, the same park Julius von Bamberg created in 1863. So we can determine the find spot of the Roman cemetery that was found in 1863 quite exactly. Next one, please. I think I have marked it on the picture. Yeah, this is the area of the park, which has not changed since the 19th century. Of course, I'm in contact with the Rhineland Department for the Preservation and Care of Field Monuments. The find spot was unknown before, and now can be added to their database. So the research has a real impact on our archaeological work in the Rhineland. Next one, please. I am not able to show you a picture of that table, but I can show you a picture of that area. That's okay. That's an impression of the find spot as it looks today. Maybe not so different from 1863, but surely very different to Roman times when the terrain was spotted with graves that belonged to the inhabitants of a nearby rural villa rustica. Next one, please. Yeah. With this idea of the area almost 2000 years ago, having the image in mind that the Flamersheim objects were found in that soil you can see on the picture, we have turned back to the Roman era, and I've come to the end of my short lecture. Next one, please. And now, thank you very much for your attention. I'm done.
Thanks so much, Patrick. That was new information to me that you'd been able to register the specific location of these objects with the archaeological authorities. So that's really exciting. And I think that talk just really speaks to the importance of doing the work on these collections and museums and all the information that can still be gained by studying these. There's one question in the chat, and then I think for interest of time, I want to move on. You already addressed the sort of Roman outline, but someone asked about sort of evidence of human remains in the urns versus sort of food or other substances. Do you want to speak to that just for a minute or two? And I think we'll hear a little bit more about this in Constance's talk as well.
Yeah. I only can say in the objects found, there was nothing left. I think in the Corning Museum, there's nothing.
Right.
There are no human remains or something. And in that condition, they were sold from Jürgen von Bamberg. So nothing left of that.
Yeah, and I think Jan describes a little bit of what was found in them.
He describes, yeah, of course.
Yeah, but
of
it would have been.
It was found, but not preserved.
Right. Yeah, great, thanks. So with that, I think we need to move on to Constance, who'll be speaking a little bit more specifically about glass in general in Roman burials in Germany. Constance Hopkins studied archaeology in Cologne, Germany, collecting her PhD research on Roman pottery production in Cologne. She began to study glass while working for the Römisch-Germanisches Museum of Cologne, and she has examined glass from projects in Turkey, Tunisia, Iraq, and Germany, with results published in the Journal of Glass Studies, published by the Corning Museum of Glass, and other significant venues. Constance co-founded the annual Glastag conference in Germany, and she lectures and consults widely on glass for several German universities and museums. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Constance.
So hi out there in the world. I hope you can hear me. And I would like to have my first slide, if possible. First slide, please. So if the first slide would appear, I would like to talk about burial customs and the glass vessels in the province of Germania Inferior, what we have heard a bit about already. And I would go for the next slide now, if we would have seen the first.
Yeah, bear with us. It's taking a little bit of time to pull up the slides, so we'll get there. I'll take it while we're working on the slides. Somebody did ask how Corning found out about these objects and how do we procure them. That's really one of the great mysteries that we haven't been able to resolve yet, how the connection between Corning and the von Bamberg family happened back in the 1960s. We think there was some, folks who might have facilitated those introductions, but a lot of the paperwork in Corning was destroyed in the 72 floods. So we don't have any documents. Oh, Patrick thinks he can answer that. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, you're muted. There you go.
Can you hear me? Can you?
Yes.
Just while we are waiting, I can add one fact for that. The von Bamberg family traditionally has contacts to the US. So Robert von Bamberg, the today living von Bamberg, even talked to Colin Powell, former Secretary of State, about those incident in 1945. Nothing happened, but they have contacts to the US. So we don't know the way exactly, but somehow on that way.
So do we have Constance's slides ready?
We have two frozen computers right now. We're trying to get those undone. Constance, do you have it on your computer?
I can open it, yes, of course.
Yes, go for it. Go ahead and open it on yours and go from there.
I can also do it if necessary. I can pull it up.
So I have opened it now.
So you can share screen at the bottom.
Yeah. Here we are.
You have it now?
Great. We've got Constance's sharing now. So let's just move with that.
Okay.
Thanks for patience and understanding, everyone.
Okay, there we are.
There we go. We got it.
You can see my screen.
Yes, we're seeing it. Thank you.
Okay. So talking about burial customs and glass vessels in Germania Inferior, this would have been my second slide I was waiting for, because what we have to keep in mind is when we are dealing with glass, with these beautiful glass vessels from antiquity, we have to keep in mind that they are actually only completely preserved in graves. Here it also depends on the fact that glasses are given as burial objects into the tombs, and this is not the case everywhere in the Roman Empire, not in this amount as we see here. We have already seen where the province of Germania Inferior is. So it was really remotely on the edge of the Roman Empire here, and the capital is Cologne. Around the birth of Christ, we've already heard that the Romans took over the Germanic area, and many people from all over the Roman Empire moved to the province, often to find their personal fortune here. There were mainly military and administrative personnel from Italy and craftsmen from Gaul. They lived in various towns and on country estates, where they also had themselves buried. We already have heard a bit of that from Patrick. So taking a closer look to the province, there are several sites where glass blowers might have worked. I think we can assume that in every bigger settlement there were glass blowers working, but we have the evidence only from Cologne, from Bonn, and outside from Trier. We already heard that Bonn was only 3 miles. For myself, I thought it was 15 miles, but okay, 30 miles, 30 miles is also fine to me. Would make 1 day journey to Flamersheim, where the star is here. To Cologne, it would have taken 2 days, and to Trier about 4 days. So if we would carry the glass from one of these settlements to Flamersheim, at least 1 day of traveling for the glass, if there's no workshop nearby. Let's come back to the different inhabitants of the province, and they all brought their own ideas regarding funeral customs. Starting with the Mediterranean Italic, they have only a few grave goods. They have a coin, a lamp, the unguentarium or ointment container, sometimes drinking vessel, personal items. Funeral festivities were very important, and the funerary monument, because commemoration was needed. The story behind is that if a person had died, a funeral is organized because only properly buried deceased can enter the underworld. For the journey, they need a light and a coin as ferry fare to cross the river Styx to the underworld. And arrive, the dead person will do well in the afterlife only if he's remembered well in this world. So therefore, we need these festivities and the funerary monument. And this you best place it at a street so that everybody who passed it could read the inscription. At that moment, he thinks of the deceased, and the deceased will be well in his afterlife. One can imagine these streets this way. Of course, not many of these monuments survived, so we usually have only what there is buried. These graves seem to be very poor because they only have a lamp and coin and just very not many items in it. And from the early period of Cologne, I can show you 2 Italian style graves. This one with a tube to give, for example, drinks or food during a feast to the deceased, which can go down here in the grave. The other grave had rest of a funerary bed where the deceased was brought in a procession to the cemetery and then burned and then buried with the rest of it. And only we have very small glass containers in these graves. So they seem to be very poor, but the grave monument might have been very big and rich. Also, these glass urns we've already seen are typical for this Italian Mediterranean custom. Here you see the lamb coming with it. And these urns are quite big and often set into a stone container to be protected. The others, the Celtic, Gaulish, and German ideas of afterlife were different. The graves were richly equipped with grave goods because the afterlife should be as rich as life. They don't need a funerary monument because there's no commemoration needed. It's just important to give all the richness of this life to the other life. A good insight is given by the so-called Ligonen Testament, which is also a tribe of in Gallia. As desired grave goods are mentioned clothing, implements for hunting and bird catching, bathing utensils, couches, carrying chairs, medicine, implements of science, and a boat made of rushes. An example from Cologne, also quite meager, but here we have a very nice glass vessel coming with it. More typical is this, a lot of vessels. Here we have some fibula brooches which were laid down here, and we can assume that there was a dress underneath. But in this grave, no glass vessel is preserved. And we have to keep in mind for this very early first century that not even 50 years before glass blowing was invented, which made glass affordable even for daily use. And this is not very far from this. So glass was not very common that time. From the Italic Mediterranean people and the Gaulish people, they start becoming one community. In the very first century, everybody still remembered their own origin, and from this, the community emerged. And everybody could reposition himself and leave past and origin behind. So it was really a new start for many people here. The community then developed their own burial customs that combined both the numerous grave gifts and a funerary monument. So this really makes sure that nothing is missing. A very nice example for this is the grave of Bella, also in Cologne. She is from the Gaulish tribe of the Remii, as the gravestone tells, but her grave has an Italian Mediterranean appearance. The gravestone is very much for this, and also the few grave goods, including 2 small vessels of glass. Other graves also combining these are these 2 graves full of grave goods and these stone urns, but still glass vessels are very small. But here for the first time we see 3 vessels of the same type. We will come back to that later. In the second half of the first century, more glass is appearing in the graves, and this one, of course, is a very rich grave in glass. And we have a dinner set for 4 people here. This is also due to the fact that now more glass blowers work in the province and glass is more widespread. In the 2nd century, we find a similar set of dishes, but combined now with a drinking set. This is the 2nd century. Late century or early 3rd century, we have again a drinking set combined with a dinner set. And very rich graves also from the 3rd century show much more glass now. Here we see for the first time also a miniature set. So it's very small. Usually you need this jug and this bowl for washing your hands. But this time it's very small. It's about 12 centimeters high. And this shows that it's not important to have a usable vessel in the grave. It's also good to have a substitute, just to show that it is there. Sometimes we have very few glass, but very, very nice glass, like this beaker here with an enamel decoration, also 3rd century. And this gives a bit of change to the 4th century now, where we have drinking sets. We have dishes of ceramic and metal and combined with glass drinking sets. The same we have here on the left side, and then they start combining the pouring vessels with drinking bowls, as we have here on the right side. Of special interest is this combination of 2 jugs and this drinking bowl, which is cut in half intentionally. And we don't know why they cut it in half, but they really put only half of this bowl in the grave. Also worth mentioning is this very nice ensemble with the so-called circus bowl. It was a product from Rome that has found its way to the distant province. Keep in mind, we are really in a remote part of the Roman Empire. So this is no surprise to get some influence from outside. Here we see again a 4th century set of glasses, a drinking vessel and pouring vessels, and also a glass drinking horn, which is clearly an influence from the other side of the border, from the German tribes living there. Coming back to the 3. Here we have, again in the 4th century, 3 bottles and 3 drinking cups. The same here with 3 drinking cups, 2 flasks, but perhaps one is replaced with this pot. The shape can vary. We have again the pouring vessels and the drinking bowl. And we can discuss if this is the same case here. We have 3 pouring vessels and a drinking bowl. And there has been much of discussion what 3 liquids might be involved here. Wine, water, oil. We don't drink oil. Wine, water, milk. The Germans drink milk, but not the Romans living here. Wine, water, honey, known as a sacrificial combination in other provinces. Also not the best idea. 3 cups really indicate 3 different drinks. Wine and water will certainly be there, but the 3rd in the bunch probably will remain a mystery to us. Let's move on to the last tomb I want to show you. This also has 3 jugs and 3 drinking cups. And we see already at the edge, on the right side, the most valuable thing in Roman glass handcraft, that Roman glass handcraft has to offer. Here clearer to see on the right upside, a cage cup. It is somewhat set apart from the others here because it was not found along with the other vessels, but placed separate with a die in front of the sarcophagus where it was found. Of these wonderful vessels, we know not even 20 complete pieces in the whole empire. And this vessel definitely with its colorfulness is one of the most beautiful among them. Now, before leaving for Rome, I wanted to show you what a remote province had to offer. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Constance. That was a wonderful exploration and seeing all those glass pieces and in their funerary assemblages and contexts. I think for those of us who are familiar with the Corning displays, to see the number of pieces, you know, kind of in that context was really, really wonderful. So thank you. We will now move on, as Constance indicated, we're sort of now, we've been kind of focused on the provinces, and now we're going to move to Rome, move to the quote unquote center of the empire, with a talk from Clarissa Bloom-Young. Clarissa is an assistant professor at the Institute of Archaeological Sciences at the University of Bochum in Germany. Her research, publications, and teaching range in the field of classical archaeology. She received her MPhil at the University of Oxford and her PhD at the Universities of Heidelberg and Bochum. With her research, Clarissa is currently concentrating on two main areas. First, the polychromy, or the coloring, of ancient sculptures, especially from the Hellenistic period in the Greek world. And second, on the burial customs of the city of Rome in the 1st and 2nd century CE, which is what she will be speaking about today. So, Clarissa.
Thank you very much. I think I can switch off the audio thing with a space, but I'm not able to switch it off myself. Now I can. Okay, I'll share the screen with you. Kate, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
We're all set.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this really wonderful and exciting session. Well, what we learned so far are informations about the present day situation in Flamersheim, and we saw the objects that were found there. And by consensus, we learned about how graves were filled in Roman imperial times in this region of Rome in Germania Inferior. But I was asked to open up the perspective on the graves themselves now, and based on my own research, we are going now from Germania Inferior to Rome itself. So I chose to name my presentation Death in Rome, and we are focusing, as you can read from the subtitle, on the manifold burial customs in the city of Rome in the 1st and 2nd century CE. In theory, okay. The aim of my presentation is that you are going to learn about the variety of burial types and burial environments in the city of Rome, again in the 1st and 2nd century CE. My introduction and my starting point is one urn from the Flamersheim group and a similar urn, which you can see here on the slide already, from the tomb of alchemists in Rome. Afterwards, I'm going to embed this tomb of alchemists, which we get to know first, in the context by showing you and introducing you to the extraordinary variety of burial types and burial places in the city of Rome. And I'm going to sum up it at the very end, and I'm going to connecting back the situation to the Flamersheim group. Let's start. This is the image you're well familiar with. In the meantime, this is the group now in the Corning Museum, which I call the Flamersheim group. And I assume that, so even though we have no burial remains in the urns to be recognized so far, and we don't know not much about it except from the notes by Jan, I assume that most of the big jugs, at least the large cylindrical ones, and the one, can you see the arrow of my, okay, perfect. So the 3 cylindrical ones and this one, I assume that all of them were urns. And for me, as a classical archaeologist focusing on the city of Rome, especially this urn here was eye-catching because this is what I know from Rome as well. So that is what I intend to continue with now. Therefore, so this is the map, a part of the map of Europe. You see the region of Germania Inferior here. The red dot signalizes the find spot of the Flamersheim group. And we now jump to Italy, to Italia and the city of Rome. Let's dive into this particular case. This is the urn I showed you from the Flamersheim group, which was eye-catching to me. And this is the urn I knew from the Tomb of Alchemists in Rome. And you see there is a similarity. Specialists in classical archaeology or in archaeology, art history, or in class in particular do see differences, but all in all, I hope you agree that they are similar. In this case, you also have the human remains that are well preserved in the urn. This urn comes from a tomb complex. You can say here, it is the so-called Tomb of Alchemists in the necropolis called Autoparco, because it was found when a car park was to be built, or Santa Rosa because of a church with that name also placed in this area, in the area of the Vatican. And what you do see here is what has been excavated. And it is a small grave building, less than 2 by 2 meters in size, and you see a small reconstruction of the Vatican group. It's like a square building with a vaulted roof. A favorite color in this time was red for these tomb buildings. The building had a little door. It was smaller than human size, so you really had to bend if you really had the intention to enter this tiny room. And what we know about this grave is quite a lot, thanks to an inscription which had been set up to the left of the door. What you do see here is the portrait or an image of, we assume it is Alchemist, because he is named in this inscription beneath here. And it reads that his wife, Fabia Filtati, has set up this building, or at least this inscription, but obviously I guess this building, all in all, for her husband, her late husband. His name is Alchemist, and he was a workman in the theater of Nero. And that is what we have. And he was a slave. So, and he and his wife were probably buried within here. And what is interesting is that they decided to put urns in the floor, so in the ground of this building. And but there was one thing in addition, and this was a glass urn, especially in this urn, which was added at some point in this bottom right corner of this small tomb, this small grave chamber. We don't know whether this particular urn, which is striking, whether this was the urn of Alchemist, who is the name giver of this tomb building, or whether it was just maybe the last member of the family who did not have any place left in the urns which were prepared in the floor of this chamber. So, but I told you it's in the Roman motherland. Probably the same as the case in many Roman regions. The burial customs are very complex, and this was only one small tomb type which I know from that area and that time. Therefore, I wanted to show you how complex it is. Wow, this was a bit ahead. Before we start with different tomb types, I also say there are different burial environments in the city of Rome, and this is really striking because if I ask you the following, imagine a typical cemetery of your region, your country of origin, or your culture. Most of you have one particular kind of cemetery in your mind, or some or few particular types of tombs, but there is no great heterogeneity. So to illuminate this a bit, I decided to stalk the people of Corning by using Google Maps and Google Street View. So I was very close to you now. And I made a screenshot of the Hope Cemetery of Corning, and some of you might be familiar with this cemetery or with a similar one. And I could say, looking at this, I would say a typical cemetery for this region, and I assume it's typical because I compared it with others, is that the graves are in rows. There are gravestones, small gravestones, which are quite similar one to another. There is no large variety. There is short information written on the gravestones. There are only small precincts, not large fields, and there's some decoration, but not a lot of decoration of flower decoration around it. So, and if you have that in mind, you say, oh yeah, I know how cemeteries or burials in our culture look like. And if you go to the city of Rome, it's so manifold, and this is what I want to show you. The first thing is that there are different areas where the tombs could be set up. The first are simple burial grounds, like in the area of Casal Bertoni, where inhumations were laid down in at a large yard. And in this case, it's without order or with less order. Sometimes they're really very orderly, put one next to another. The second thing where graves could be set up are so-called necropolis. If we translate it literally, these are city of the dead, and this is how it looks like. They look like small cities with grave buildings and with pathways, and some of the necropoles seem to be planned to some extent, and some are more grown and more, or with less order, some with more order. Most important of these two burial places is that both are restricted to the topic of death or the situation of death and bereavement, and there's nothing else than the burials. But there was a third environment where people could set up graves, and these were the arterial roads around the city of Rome, where people came to the city or left it, and where not only burials took place, but where also villas were set up, built, and workshops and taverns. And the streets were really busy with daily life. So everyone who had a grave there, or which the family who decided to put up a grave here, they really had the grave settled within part of an area of the daily life. Totally different to if we think of a cemetery, which is a restricted area. But also the tombs themselves differed. So first we have to understand that there were inhumations and cremations at the same time. I put up one image of an inhumation, a very simple one, a burial of a person who was probably wrapped in a shroud, which I can tell from the bones as they are placed. There are some grave goods at the feet, and then in the end the body was covered with large roof tiles and covered with earth. And then we have cremations put in urns, and the urns were buried in earth. And then there is the question of what happened on top of the grave. And do we have only these simple graves, these individual burials, or also mausolea, for example, or grave architectures? And this is the case. The most simple burial was topped by grave marker in stone, for example, but we also have numerous graves without any archaeological traces of marking, and I assume we have to expect grave markers in wood or precincts that were marked with plants. I have several hints for that. And then there are bigger architectures, monuments like the small architecture of Alcimus, but also larger mausolea, which have house-like fronts, as you can see it in this reconstruction. They are vaulted in the back, but the front is like roof-topped. And you can enter it through a door, and then you have a grave chamber in the inside. And either to a later time, there were more inhumations or body burials in these grave chambers. And in earlier times, in 1st and 2nd century, very popular, were so-called columbarium. And the word columbarium means dovecot. And this is because there were so many niches in the walls that it looks like a dovecot. And in these niches, they were placed within the wall. It was prepared from the very beginning of the building of this this architecture. There were urns built in the wall. So the urn from this niche go up to this, or have like this shape, but it's part of the wall. And then on top of the urn and within this niche is the lid of the urn, placed on top of the urn. And everyone who enters this grave building could go to the individual urn and even open the lid and, for instance, give a libation, so an offering, for instance. And these columbaria could have different sizes. They could have sizes for 12 urns only, like for a small family, or in this case for 40 urns. Maybe this was a family or another kind of group that gathered together, that belonged together in what way whatsoever. And then, surprise, there were huge columbaria that held up to 500 urns. And in this case, of course, this is something more official, where you could rent or buy particular niches and could even decorate your individual area within this huge building and name it. You see in the right image the columbarium. It's called Columbarium of Scribonius Menophilus, but it's obviously a niche sold to individuals or particular families, and then the people could change the original appearance of the wall decoration, for instance, by replacing the painted tabula, the painted field where the name could have been placed into, by a marble slab, or by closing the niche with a slab, or by repainting the wall here. There was a new reddish frame put around it. So things like that we find as well. In the very end, coming from the very simple burials like the inhumations in the ground with no grave markings left nowadays, up to stone markers, up to larger monuments. And large monuments, there were also the very extroverted monuments, people who decided to have a grave in the shape of a pyramid, for example, or people like in the left image, parents who had the loss of their very talented son, who was a talented poet, and they decided to make a very huge altar-shaped gravestone with a portrait statue of the child and with very successful poems of the child written next to him. So this is what also appears in the whole group of typical Roman burials in the city of Rome. So, and if we now want to go back to the example of alchemists, you understand that we have one grave urn similar to that what we know from Flamersheim, found in this small grave building. This, by the way, is a very interesting grave building because from the outside it looked like these typical columbaria, like this typical mausolea with a small door and this vaulted roof. You see, one looks like another, and if you enter these doors, in every building would have been a columbarium with this niches and the urns. And in the case of Alcimus, Fabia Flutate's wife, probably because of financial reasons, had to decide that to spare money and to build without these niches and to put all urns into the ground only. But from the outside, nobody would have known that. So this is quite interesting how this is like a fake columbarium, probably in order to save money. But I wanted to show you that too, because it has this urn which reminded me of the urn of Flamersheim. If we come to the conclusion, I would like to remember you that I've shown you first the enormous variety of burial places, the environments, and you have to think about what does it mean if a burial place was chosen which looked like a modern day cemetery, in the case kind of it's one inhumation after next to another, or if it looks like a proper city of dead with all the mausolea. Or if you just go along a large road and there were tombs and houses and workshops mixed, the idea is somewhat different, and also the impact on the passers-by and also the mourners. The second thing I showed you is that there is a huge variety in the tombs themselves, from very simple to very complex. And then we have to, what we don't know in the individual case, but what we have to understand is that the individual choice depended first on the possibilities the people had, either the family, the bereaved, or maybe the people who decided to take care of their grave before they died, which was also common in Roman times. And of course, on the intentions the people had. We cannot say that a simple grave means that the person was poor, but it could also be an intentional decision to say, I want to have a simple grave, or I want for a family it's only a simple grave. We cannot tell in general. So if we think about the urn from Flamersheim, I know this is Germania Inferior, it's another region of Rome, it's not the motherland itself. But what you can understand is that we have this urn or the other urns also from that group, and it could have various contexts of how the burial situation might have looked. And of course, as Constanze could show us, it had been strongly influenced by local customs as well. What is important to me, that what I could show you is the background of the city of Rome, or of Roman burial customs in a glimpse. But what we also have to keep in mind, of course, and this is what touches us, of course, is that we have individual cases here of bereavement and loss, and that this is what we are dealing with in this case. So this is the touching point, and this is what the Roman culture, what keeps together the Roman culture in the motherland and the Roman culture in Germania Inferior. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I hope I could contribute to this session with some more information. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Clarissa. That was, I think, a really great way to kind of round up our wonderful set of talks in our short time together today, which has flown by. We have just a minute or two to try to answer a couple questions. So Data wants to know about the sort of the transition from cremation urns to inhumation burials. And I think we've seen that kind of come and go. I don't know if why that might be. If Clarissa, if you want to start with that, or if anybody else wants to take that one on. And then Constanze, oh, you're muted.
I think this is one of the most complex questions we have in this field. There are several ideas, and for me the most logical is that they usually didn't burn children, and they wanted the complete body of the child to be buried. And there's a written source that says, my wife has died. She was so young. She was so beautiful. I don't want her to cremate her body down to the ashes. I want to preserve it like it is. And I think that's what the turning point, that they wanted to keep the body kind of entire, not kind of burnt down to ashes. But it's a very, very complex question.
Yeah,
it's also complex because at least in the field of classical archaeology, colleagues always try to make this clear transition that in 1st and 2nd century there were cremations and later on there were inhumations, and at least in Rome that is not the case at all. We really have both at the same time. There is no transition. Later on, yes, we do have in 3rd or especially in the 4th century there is a big focus on inhumations, but previously, in the time before, we don't have this separation or this transition.
It's an interesting question too. It's actually, when we were working on the Past Present exhibition, Troy Smythe, our interpreter, and I met with some local funerary professionals here in Corning. And this was one of the things we talked about a lot, actually, is this sort of burial versus cremation, and they were telling us that in the United States, especially, cremation has become much more popular in the last decade or so, and it's really it's just a sort of generational transition, and sometimes there's religious reasons, but it's just sort of a cultural preference, really, is sort of what it comes down to. And it's interesting that we see this sort of we see it now, this sort of almost natural rhythm in this kind of transition back and forth, and we saw it in antiquity too. And I think exactly as you say, Clarissa, it's not a clear line of demarcation, it's just slow transition. One other really quick question, were all urns necessarily used for holding cremated human remains, or might they have other uses, such as storage for grain or other materials? Constance, yeah.
Yeah, what you call urn. In Germany, we would use this word actually only for the vessels to put the ashes in, the cremation rests. But of course, these vessels can be used for everything. And especially with these big glass vessels, we have the problem that we only know them more or less only from burials. As I said in the beginning, we have the entire vessels only from the graves, and so we don't know actually if they were also used in the kitchen to store food or so. And the second point is that you also could put food into the graves as burial gifts. And so, of course, everything could have been in there, in the household as well as in the grave.
Thank you. Well, with that, unfortunately, we've sort of lost our community room time, but we do have another community room session this afternoon for those of you who will be around with us then. So I hope you join us for those. In 5 minutes, we'll be starting our next panel, which is on the topic of Chinese reverse painted glass, excuse me. So we're moving around the world and several centuries forward in time, but that will also be a great conversation. So thanks once again to our panelists. Thanks to all our attendees for being here. And yeah, enjoy the rest of seminar.